I'm a 19-year-old male, and I live with my parents. Our house is really small, with all our bedrooms on one floor, so it makes it pretty difficult when I want to smoke weed. What I usually do is go to this little nature preserve near my house, and to get to it, you have to go down this dirt road which is about a half-mile long, and at the end of it is a small parking lot which is where I'll chill. It's a pretty popular spot during the day, so there's always cars coming and going. It was a Friday night, and I didn't have anything going on that next Saturday, so I figured I'd head down to the nature preserve to smoke for a bit. It was around 7:30 p.m., and it was summer, so the sun was just starting to go down. As I pull onto the dirt road, some white SUV pulls in at the same time behind me. I hardly pay any mind to this since, like I said before, it's a pretty popular spot. I park in the far corner of the small parking lot and light one up. After an hour of just sitting there on my phone, the sun had gone down completely and it was pitch black. There also weren't any streetlights there, so I literally couldn't see anything. I have my windows tinted way darker than what was legal, so the light from my phone screen reflected off the inside of the window, making it virtually impossible to see outside. I turned my phone off and just looked around, and I noticed that white SUV was still there. This was kind of weird, since I've never seen anybody there after dark before, but I assumed they must have been doing the same thing that I was. Although, I couldn't see any light on inside their car. I'd imagine they'd have a phone screen or something on, but no, it was completely dark. I didn't think they had gotten out of their car either, because it'd be creepy as hell to be in those woods at night. Even with the paranoia that being high can bring, I still managed to shrug it off and continue watching my YouTube videos. At one point, I swore I heard the sound of rocks being walked on right outside my car, so again, I turned my phone off and tried to look out my dark tinted window. I put my face up to the glass, but it was like I was staring into a black wall or something. That's when I realized someone was up against my door trying to look inside. I screamed, and they banged on my window with their fists, causing me to scream even louder. Since I left my keys in the ignition, I was able to instantly start my car and take off. Once I did this, my headlights illuminated 3 figures sprinting back to that white SUV. Not giving it a second thought, I floored it down that dirt road, not caring about how bumpy it was. I could see their headlights coming up in the distance, but by now I was already back on the main road and I disappeared into the night. Luckily, they weren't able to keep up with me, and I got away. Since then, I don't go back to that parking lot at night, and I haven't seen that white SUV since. This story happened during Christmas season last year. My family had just moved to a new house from the city to a suburban area. It was honestly way more of a change than I thought it would be. Everything being a lot more spread out meant that we had to drive most places. I was used to walking or riding my bike everywhere. This also meant that I had to get my own car, which was awesome. I ended up getting a small single cab Ford Ranger. When Christmas season came around, most of the people in our neighborhood that celebrated Christmas would get real trees. Back in the city, most people I knew would just have fake trees, since there weren't a lot of places to get a real one. So my family decided to get a real tree from a tree farm not too far from our house. The day after Thanksgiving, my parents sent me in my truck to go pick one up. The entrance to this place was off some side street with no houses for a few hundred feet. It had what looked to be a hand-painted sign nailed to a log advertising their trees. Beyond the sign was some dirt path that looked like it could barely fit 2 cars across. I couldn't tell how far down it led, and it took me like almost 10 minutes to finally get to the farm. There were rows and rows of Christmas trees that were still in the ground and looked way overgrown. I saw a small shed which I assumed was where the owner would be. As I parked my truck, I saw him come out with a friendly grin on his face, and he welcomed me. As I went to shake his hand, he asked me if I came by myself. Confused, I said yeah. He then asked me what size tree I was looking for. Now, my parents didn't give me any information on what size to get, so I pulled my phone out to call them. The guy looked at me like I had just tried to steal his wallet. In other words, he looked pissed. I forgot what was said on the phone, and when I hung up, I told him the tree I wanted. He grunted and led me to one of the rows of trees. His nice demeanor was now changed to cold and mean. It wasn't really cause for concern in my eyes, so I didn't let him make me uncomfortable. Eventually, I picked the tree out. He put some orange tape on one of the branches to mark it, and had me follow him back to the shed so I could pay, and so he could get his chainsaw to cut it down. He told me the tree cost $200, which I didn't plan on it costing that much, so I only had $50 in my wallet. This infuriated him even more, which honestly made me kinda mad since his trees seemed way too overpriced. Although this was the only tree farm in my area and I really wanted a real tree, so I told him I was just gonna run to the ATM. As I turned to walk to my car, the guy lunged to grab my arm. This startled me, and my natural reaction was to jump and pull away. My heart was beating fast now. He exhaled and apologized, and told me to take my time getting the money. I just looked at him, not knowing what to say. I get back in my truck and pull down the road. After that, I didn't even want to go back. This guy was a creep and he wasn't getting my money. Well, my parents' money, but still. I was like 5 minutes down that road, and in my rearview mirror, I saw some guy on an ATV flying up behind me. I saw that it was the creep, and he was motioning for me to pull over. Now, I've heard enough horror stories to know that he probably didn't have anything good planned, but no matter how fast I went, he kept up with me. I figured once I got to the main road, he'd stop following me, but not even a minute later, I see him reaching for something, and I actually said, "Oh shit," when I saw him pull out a handgun. We're going like 50 miles an hour at this point, and I didn't think my little truck could go any faster on this terrain. So instead of speeding up, I did the opposite. Before he was able to fire any shots, I slammed on my brakes, and his ATV smashed into the back of my truck, and the guy did a full front flip over his handlebars and onto the ground. He didn't move after that. He just stayed face first on the ground, and his ATV looked destroyed. I floored it out of there, actually feeling really guilty that I may have just killed him, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would I care so much about this guy when he just had a gun and was about to shoot me? To be honest, I don't know. Once I got back to the main road, I drove a few miles and then pulled over to call the police. I did my best to explain everything, but with the adrenaline still pumping, it was tough to recount everything. After a few minutes, I took some deep breaths and calmed down. I wanted to go back to meet the police there and make sure that he was alright, and against my better judgment, that's what I did. I could see the flashing lights of the police cars and ambulances through the woods, so I drove back down that dirt road. By the time I got there, the guy was in the ambulance, and he luckily did have a pulse. The cops asked me questions about what had happened, and this time I was better able to explain the situation. I asked if I was going to get any criminal charges, and the cop just chuckled and said what I did was clearly an act of self-defense, and told me if I wanted to press charges I could. I never ended up following through with any legal stuff. I never wanted to see that guy again, which wasn't going to happen anyways. He ended up in a coma, which was the last update I had about him. It's been 3 months since this incident happened, and as far as I know, his farm is still open. Rumor has it that he was on some big prescriptions for schizophrenia, and it's assumed that he had stopped taking them, which would explain why he was acting the way he was acting. My family ended up getting a fake tree, unfortunately, but other than that, I had a very good Christmas. But now, I know not to go back to that tree farm for next year. My brother and I have been riding dirt bikes for years now. This story occurs when we were riding through the trails in a desert out in California. We live in the Midwest and had taken a road trip out here to go on a big desert ride. We'll always have a well planned out schedule of where we want to ride and take notes of different gas stations and restaurants that we might want to stop at. What we would do is park our RV in an area near the trails and ride the day, and come back at night and sleep in the RV, and then drive the bikes on a trailer somewhere else for the next day. The first day of riding was going pretty well. I was enjoying my day ripping around through the desert, heading in the direction of the first gas station. The trail met up with a main road, which we were supposed to follow for a couple miles. As we pulled up to the gas station, I immediately could tell this place hadn't been open in years. I took off my helmet and just yelled at my brother for not making sure the place was still in operation. I honestly felt a little bad for tearing into him like that, but now we were kind of in trouble, as we wouldn't have enough gas to get back. Neither of our phones had service on this stretch of road, and we were just surrounded by desert, with no cars in sight. I was almost certain that we wouldn't be able to make it back to the RV, but my brother had made a map of every gas station and restaurant in the area. It looked like there was a gas station that was a shorter distance to us than the RV, so that's the direction we headed, obviously gambling that we wouldn't run out. So we got back on the trails, and to my dismay, after only a few miles, my brother slowed to a stop in front of me, his machine out of fuel. I got that familiar sinking feeling in my stomach, and I was trying not to panic. But I knew that this situation could end up being really bad. Up ahead, there was another road that the trail intersected with, but it wasn't a big main road like before, just a single lane dirt road. We walked our bikes to the edge of the trail and just sat there, waiting for a car to drive by. Like 2 hours went by, and we only saw one car, which didn't even stop when we tried flagging them down. According to my brother's map, we really weren't near anything except some little restaurant which looked to be roughly 10 miles from where we were. We decided it'd be best if we just walked to it, hoping that nobody would steal our bikes. I thought about trying to ride my own bike, but I don't think I would have made it all the way there without breaking down, and walking 10 miles with no bike would be hard enough. If I had to push my bike, it would just be miserable. So off we started walking. We had been about 30 minutes out when we saw a truck approaching in the distance. As it slowed to a stop next to us, some old guy with a nasty looking beard rolled the window down and asked us if we were lost. Now, he didn't ask if we needed a ride, or why we were walking on some dirt road in the middle of the desert. He just asked if we were lost. The inflection in his voice almost seemed threatening. We explained to him that we were just out dirt biking, that we were out of gas, and just needed a lift to the nearest station to fill up. He gave us a look that made it seem like he didn't believe us, which made no sense because we were decked out in our full riding gear. He then told us that we were on his private property, and how he doesn't take too kindly to trespassers. We apologized and said we didn't know it was his property, and how we just needed some gas and that we'd turn back around. He thought for a moment, then said he'd go get a few gas cans and help us out. We thanked him, and he told us he'd take us to wait for him by our bikes and to hop in the back of his truck. I was feeling a tad bit uneasy, but my brother and I hopped in anyways. We immediately realized it was full of empty shotgun shells and a bunch of other bullet casings. After a few minutes, he dropped us off and told us that it was going to take about an hour for him to come back and not to move. As he drove off, my brother said he did not trust this guy at all, but there wasn't much we could even do. We were stranded. We waited for maybe 20 minutes when a blue sedan drove by us and asked if we were good. We said that we ran out of gas, but some guy in a red truck was going to get gas for us. When I said this, the guy's friendly smile quickly ran from his face. He said that the dirt road led to a small area with some houses, and that the guy with the truck was his neighbor, and how he has some serious mental issues. He also said that the police are always at this guy's house, and apparently he's been in and out of jail for various assault charges, and has been caught for kidnapping. He followed all this up by saying how he likely did not have good intentions for us. He recommended we get in his car and that he'd take us to get us gas for the bikes. I felt way more comfortable with him, so we got in the car. As we returned to the trail, we saw that red truck pull over, the guy looking for us around our bikes. Once he saw the car pulling up, he ran into his truck and sped off. This in fact confirmed that he did not actually plan on getting us gas, and my heart sank. Luckily though, he was gone, and my brother and I profusely thanked that guy for potentially saving our lives. We filled up and took off back for our RV. I insisted that the guy that helped us take a $100 bill as a thank you, and that was that. We didn't let that experience ruin our time, and we made sure the next day that we went to gas stations that were actually open. The rest of our trip went smoothly, and nothing like that happened again. I'm writing this story as a coping mechanism, I guess you could say. This night still plays back in my head every day when I try and sleep, and I don't know how to move past it. So, for some context, I live in an area of New England on a big lake, which I'll leave out for anonymity. There were a lot of houses around the lake, all connected by this big dirt gravel road. Most of my neighbors' houses were vacation homes, but my family lived here year-round. It was the beginning of spring when this happened, so most of the houses were empty and it was really rainy most days. When we were younger, my friends and I would always hang out at my house and we'd play manhunt in the woods. This night wasn't any different. It was the first sunny day we had in the last 5 or 6 days, and my friends and I were playing outside the entire day. We'd used the road to walk to different parts of the woods or lake, and since it had recently rained, the road had a lot of big puddles. When it started to get dark out, we all decided it was a good time to start manhunt. I remember that I was one of the hiders in the first round. Where we were, I knew of some old shed which had been there my whole life. I ran through a little clearing in the woods to get to it, and I hid inside. I peered out the shed window, and I remember it was a clear night, and the moon illuminated almost everything. It was then I saw a figure come out of the tree line, and they were just looking around. I assumed it was one of my friends looking for me, so I stayed quiet. They came up to the shed and tried to open it. Not wanting to be out already, I held the door shut with all my strength as they pulled. I figured whichever one of my friends it was must have been working out or something, because they were pulling way harder than I'd imagined. After a minute, the yanking stopped, and I saw the light through the shed window get blocked by whoever it was. I ducked behind one of the empty shelves and saw as they peered in. My heart skipped a beat when I realized this person was way taller than any of my friends. They looked to be a fully grown adult. I held my breath as they looked around for a moment, but was relieved when they turned and walked back into the woods, in the direction away from the road. This could have been one of the neighbors for all I knew. I had no idea who owned this shed. I didn't feel safe though, and quietly crept out and back to the direction of the road. Before I had time to hide again, one of my friends caught me. Since I was the last to be found, the round was over, and we decided to head back to my house. We all walked down the road just joking around, and I planned on telling them about that guy when we got back. I didn't want to freak them out while we were still outside, so I just waited. As we avoided puddles, we saw something up ahead that made us all freeze. It looked like a girl lying face first in one of the puddles. About a minute of silence went by before one of my friends said, "What the hell is that?" And we all sprinted up the road. Once we got back to my house, nobody said anything about what we just saw. We just played Xbox, and they stayed over for the night, which was already planned. It was quiet for the rest of the night, but nobody got much sleep. The next morning, all my friends left, and we agreed to all not say anything about it, which in retrospect was really stupid, but we thought we'd somehow get in trouble if we were involved. Later that day, a police officer came by my house and asked my parents if they heard anything about the girl who was in the road. Obviously, they didn't. My dad called me into the room because I was out the night before, but the sight of the cop in my doorway just terrified me. I stuttered that I hadn't seen anything and that we were just hanging out around the lake the whole day. The cop thanked us, and continued up the road. My dad looked at me and in a serious tone told me that if I had any information about this girl, I had to tell the police. In my 10-year-old mind, I thought this meant I'd be getting in trouble if I did, so I insisted that I knew nothing. After a couple of weeks, we had found out what had happened. The girl's autopsy determined that she was drugged with some sort of roofie, and she escaped whoever had roofied her and was stumbling down the road. With all the puddles from the rainstorm, she tripped and fell face first and knocked herself unconscious into a puddle and drowned. It was also found that she'd ended up being assaulted, but unfortunately, the person who had done all of this wasn't found. This brings me back to when I was playing Manhunt and that guy that I saw in the woods. I'm almost certain that he was the man who was responsible, and it gives me chills to this day knowing I came face to face with him, and that if he managed to open the door, I may not be here to write this. On the other hand, the guilt of me not saying anything in fear of getting in trouble still haunts me to this day. This happened 10 years ago. I'm 20 now, and the person was never found. My friends and I all share the same guilt over this situation, but by now, coming forward wouldn't make a difference. I hope that writing this gives me some peace, and for everyone reading this, I hope that you know that keeping quiet during something like this is a very selfish thing to do, and that you giving the police any information could be the difference between life and death. My wife and I were visiting my brother and his fiancée in upstate New York for a weekend. I hadn't seen him in almost a year because of a promotion I got at work, so I was busier than I had ever been. He lived in a pretty big house on a hillside that overlooked Lake Placid, and we were thrilled to go see it. On the Friday after work, my wife and I hopped into our Ford Explorer and began the 4-hour drive from western Massachusetts to New York. We listened to mountain horror stories on the way to try and set a creepy vibe for our drive. Honestly, these stories did give me the creeps a little bit as the sun went down and the roads got less and less populated. After another hour or so, we pulled down this dark, gravelly road. My wife joked to me that we'd see a figure come running out of the woods and jump in front of our car, to which I just laughed and played along with it. There was no way I was letting her know I was actually kind of on edge, or else I'd never hear the end of it. Not surprisingly, we made it to my brother's house with no creepy figures running in front of us. We had dinner and ended up sitting around his fireplace, just catching up. That quickly turned into scary story time yet again. My brother was telling us about all the creepy things he's encountered over the last few years he'd been living there. Most of them were just animals walking around their yard at night, setting off the motion lights and then running off. But one story he told actually freaked him and his fiancée out to the point where they almost moved. Apparently, some deranged guy had been coming by all the houses in the area, tapping on people's windows and leaving weird letters in their mailboxes. The police were aware of this and would patrol that area more, but nobody was ever able to catch him in the act. After a few months, my brother was getting sick of all this and seriously considered just moving out, but it was around that time that it just completely stopped. This occurred about 6 months prior to us visiting, and he said that nobody heard or seen the guy since. That story actually sort of gave me goosebumps, which I wasn't ashamed of, since it happened where we were staying. Needless to say though, I didn't let it ruin my weekend, and I actually had a great weekend. We had planned to leave Sunday night so we could get as much time as possible, so I'd taken that next Monday off. As Sunday was coming to an end, we packed the car and said our goodbyes. I had to fight back tears a little when I hugged him, so I was pretty emotional when my wife and I got in the car to leave. I just put the car in drive and started back down his road, and only got about 200 feet before I realized that I had no idea how to get home. I stopped and was putting my house address in the GPS when my wife gasped, pointing to her side window. It took me a second to see what she was looking at. Then I saw him. This old-looking guy looked into the car, smiling at us. This sick fuck started giggling like a 5-year-old and then started tapping on the window. My wife screamed at me to drive, but I was literally frozen in fear. This only lasted for like 10 seconds, and no joke, this guy skipped back into the woods. It was then I snapped out of shock and put the pedal down. Now, it seems like this story was straight out of a bad horror movie, but it actually did happen. I called my brother to tell him what we just saw, and not surprisingly, he didn't believe me. But once he heard my wife's panic in her voice, he took it serious. He never ended up running into that creepy guy for a few weeks after that, which didn't surprise me too much. As cheesy as this story may sound though, it did disturb me for quite a while after that.